Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Another noteworthy story is new census data showing population shifts in the U.S. between July 2022 and July 2023. And Alicia, you have dug into these data. Can you give us a sense of what are the overall trends that you see? And is this a continuation of past years, or is there anything that sticks out here?
So there's a continuation of the trend that people are moving from blue states largely to red states, or you could say that they're moving from high tax states or in states with high cost of living to states with lower taxes and lower cost of living. That's been going on for more than a decade. And we saw an acceleration during the pandemic of that trend. Now we've returned to more pre-pandemic levels of migration, with the exception actually of California, which continued to lose people to other states at the pandemic pace, which is interesting. I think one of the reasons you actually saw a drop off in the migration was because interest rates rose, which made moving more expensive, and people couldn't actually just generally afford to move because it'd be trading in a mortgage that, for one, that actually cost more, even if they moved to a lower cost state. So I think actually some blue states may have actually benefited in that way from the higher mortgage interest rates. One thing I think we've been seeing actually in the last couple of years that is also differs from the pre-pandemic trends is migration out of the Northwest. Washington and Oregon in particular, both of the states actually were gaining people from other states, in particular California. What we've seen in the last couple of years is now they've actually started losing people to other states, which has contributed to slower population growth, or in some cases, population loss. And I think it's interesting why that could be happening. Well, one reason, if you just look at Washington State, it's an interesting case study. If you look at pre-pandemic and even through 2020, it was still gaining about tens of thousands of people every year. And then in 2021 and 2022, they actually did a few things in Washington. They imposed low carbon fuel standard, a cap and trade program, and they also imposed a capital gains tax, 7% capital gains tax hitting their high earners. And ever since then, they've been losing people on an accelerating pace to other states, about 15,000 in this last year. Now, it's also possible that Seattle's crime problems could be contributing to that. But again, Washington had been a net gainer, and Oregon actually picked up a seat in the last census. So now you're actually seeing that reverse, and now they're starting to lose people to states like Arizona, Nevada, Texas, and Florida. And I think the crime issue is one driver of that. But I also think it's the increasing cost of living, energy prices, as well as taxes, that's also driving the out-migration. These states were attractive to California transplants because they had a lower cost of living and lower taxes, and that's no longer the case.
Kim, we are still a ways from the 2030 census and then the next round of redistricting, but there are projections floating around. If you base the redistricting on the census trends that we see now, how would that change political power in the House of Representatives? And there are some big numbers here. One map I'm looking at shows California would lose 4 seats, New York would lose 3, Illinois 2. Also losing 1 seat would be Oregon, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. The big winner, Texas, up 4 seats, Florida up 3 seats, also gaining seats. A whole swath of the South, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and then Idaho, Utah, and Arizona. And it's not guaranteed that those would be flipping from blue seats to red seats. If you add 4 House districts in Texas, one of those may well end up being a Democratic district. And of course, there's also no projecting how trends will change. Republican Party used to do very well among suburbanites, and it has struggled among suburbanites lately. And so voters are always a moving target. But notable in a House of Representatives now where the margin is something like 4 or 5 votes, that in the next census, just based on population trends, you could have a shift in power of seats that is 2 or 3 times that large.
The uncertainty is totally true. We don't know where exactly within states these seats would go. And obviously, a big part of this is also gerrymandering. There's a lot of different questions, but it has to be very concerning, or it should be very concerning to Democrats, that the clear trend at the moment is massive outmigration from states where they have strongholds into places that have become very solidly red states. And we've already seen a little bit of this happen in the last census. We ended up with some reapportionment in which blue states lost some seats and they went to red states. I saw one map that suggested that California, New York, Illinois, Minnesota, Rhode Island, and Oregon on present trend would lose a combined 12 House seats in 2030, and that most of those would indeed flow to places like Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Utah, Idaho. This is not only huge election consequences, but I think it brings up two other really interesting questions. One is that gerrymandering fight. We've been talking about it a lot on the show. I think that if you saw this trend actually come to fruition, that it would only increase the pressures and the current political fight that we've seen centered on Supreme Court races in many of these states, also state legislative races, because they are the ones that help set the legislative maps in the end. I think that this portends maybe more of a political fight there to come. The other interesting question, because I know it's very much on the minds of governors in the states that are receiving a lot of these in-migrations, is how do you, if you're a red state governor, keep your state's politics intact? If you do have a lot of people coming from blue states, it could be that they're coming because they prefer your brand of politics. It could just be that they're fleeing things that they don't like, but they don't necessarily sign up to your red state politics, as it were. So there's been a big discussion among red state governors about policies and approaches in which you try to reach out to these new people who are coming, get them to see why it is that they are moving to the state that they're in, that good taxes, low taxes are good, fewer business regulations are good, less crime is good. What are the policies that create those so that you don't end up getting outvoted by all your new migrants and change the political character of the state?
Alicia, we'll give you the last word, but surely some lessons on policy to be drawn from these kinds of numbers, especially when you see the same sort of trends year after year after year. And remember, though, what Gavin Newsom said, governor of California. He had a counter to this in his recent debate with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And what he said was that more Floridians have been coming to California than the other way around in the last 2 years, unquote. And Alicia, this is just one of a few places where, to my eye, it sounded like he had done his homework and found some kind of very specific statistic that was hedged in some way to counter the attack that he knew was coming. But in the face of the raw data, look at the census numbers. California is not growing, it's shrinking. And I think if he's going to run for president in 2028 or thereafter, he's going to have a better answer to that question.
Right. And I think what he was referring to apparently was the per capita migration. The raw numbers show that many more Californians are moving to Florida than the other way around. But because California's population is nearly twice as large, he was referring again to per capita, so the per capita numbers. But even the per capita numbers were almost exactly the same. Going back to, as you say, if he plans to run for president in 2028, I still think he's planning to run this election cycle and thinks that something's going to happen or he's going to bow out. It is a problem. California under his watch for the first time has been losing population. Despite all of its abundant, its natural beauty, its outdoors, it has the most, I would argue, natural assets of any place in the country. And nonetheless, people are moving. And now that has a variety of reasons. Some people don't care for its progressive politics, but it's also just the high cost of living. And that includes the taxes, the energy policies, the energy costs. And there's also the crime issue, the homelessness that really contribute to a deteriorating quality of life. And so even though if you get great weather, that's not enough to keep people in California. And things could always get worse in the state, but this is a political liability for Newsom going forward.
Thank you, Alicia and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.